Hi, Chris Dawes here. I've stepped away from the commentary box for a change and I'm in front of the camera because this time I'm talking about my business, Open Doors Training. Founded by myself as a project of passion because I felt so lucky that I get paid to do the things I do now. Commentating, hosting awards, voiceover artist, TV, radio, podcasts, live shows, you name it, all of those things are an absolute privilege, especially when I came from someone who was paralysed by fear when I had to present at university and when I first went into business after graduating. But thankfully, I got accused of making IT entertaining when I was in my sales and marketing role. I know, not that easy, but I'm proud of that one. And that's what really was the trigger, enabled me to carry on with all the different things I do now. I want to now help others open doors that they may not yet know exist. And you never will know exist unless you put yourself in a position where you can be heard. Whether that's in business, in public sector, in sport, all of it is the same. If you're silent, no one will know you exist and how good you are at things. You've got to put yourself in a position where you open those doors, at least so that you can knock on the doors and they know you are there. So that is what we do here at Open Doors Training. It's not about creating blueprints of presenters or media darlings or whatever it may be. It's about unlocking you. Instead of being the contained version of you, we want to get 110% of you. You probably exaggerate it by 10%. I'm sure I'm not like this when I'm at home on the sofa. The wife would kill me. But it is about still being you. And that is what we work on within all of our training. So come on over, opendoorstraining.co.uk. Let's have a conversation to see how we may be able to assist you going into, hopefully, a better year in 2021.
Sneaky one for some of you to get you in the mood. Alexa, play Thunderstruck.
Two new circuits to the Power Tour calendar, but there's been racing here at Castle Combe for years, and this section in particular is really going to sort out the men from the boys. It's the fearsome Quarry Corner. The approach is really fast, about 160 miles an hour in a GT car and 140, 145 in an F3. But it's got all the problems a driver hates. Braking on bumps, braking on a bend. And then you're here, faced with this blind entry, where you can either defend to the inside and not take the ideal line, or take the ideal line to the left and leave the door wide open for passing. I guarantee there'll be action and spills here. But let's have a look from the driver's point of view how Quarry fits in with a complete lap. We're on board the TVR Speed 12 with Michael Kane, who's been fastest in testing for this and is really trying to get pole position. Onto the start of the lap, he comes out really wide, and this is very bumpy on the approach to Folly, the first bend, which is taken flat out. Just watch that bonnet bouncing up and down. Approaching Avon Rise, he's trying to pick his braking point just over the bump, staying on the brakes round the corner. This is the tricky section into Quarry. Hold that car in very, very tight and get on the power and let it run out wide. He's only got a short straight with one gear change before he's into the S's. He clatters over the inside. There are no posts there now, but they will be for the race. They have already been knocked out. And accelerating out is really difficult round Old Paddock. He has to lift midway through the corner. And now it's down, hammer down, on the approach to Tower, which is really hard on the brakes. Only the brave will get through on the inside here. It's off camber, the car's sliding out, a little bit too early on the throttle and it'll really move, and into Bobby's, bang over the curb, a dip in the middle there and accelerating out again. Really hard corner that. Up onto the final pass, and this is probably the best overtaking point into the last corner at Camp. This is a very good lap and he's catching up on Marcos, which hopefully won't spoil it. Will he get across the line? Yes, he does.
How are the big GT cars going to fare around it? Ben and Martin have the answer.
Added twiddly bits and over 20,000 spectators for the weekend. Beautiful sunshine, perfect, but not perfect for the GTO Viper. Sheared an oil pump drive in the engine, and the team unable to replace it for the start. And they should have been starting on row 3. There's the gap alongside the black and yellow TVR. We're on row 2 with Rob Bath, who's in the pole-sitting GTO car. Lights on the starting gantry go green. 60 minutes of racing gets underway, and the 3 black GT cars out front thunder away. Riding with Tim Sugden right ahead, Kelvin Burt trying to undo some of the damage that was wrought in qualifying. And that battle for GTO honours right behind the silver GT2 Porsche. And look at the orange car down the inside. Matt Turner going for glory, trying to take the lead of GTO. He's inside the silver Porsche. He's got the lead. Rob Barth in the green and blue TVR in the middle. 3 abreast coming down to the first chicane. Ben, this should be fun.
It should be. A little Rob Barth make contact with Matt Turner as they come through the S's, and Barth all sideways gets it together. Great view from Tim Sugden. And look at Kelvin Burt down on the inside.
Yes, takes back 7th place. Cut and thrust up here as David Jones gets onto the grass on the exit of the corner. Leader stretching away. Matt Turner passing the GT2 Porsche, and down the inside Tim Sugden takes 7th back from Kelvin Burt. David Jones there, he's lost 2 places with that little sideways moment earlier on.
The battle seems to be in the GTOs at the moment. Up front, it's not quite the same battle. Bobby Verdon-Rowe has control of this race in the TVR Speed 12. The Viper in second, the Lister Storm in third.
And Matt Turner easing away. The GT2 Porsche is a bit of a stopper for the rest of them. Kelvin Burt now still chasing Tim Sugden. Gets a good drive out of Camp Corner. Look at this, he's almost running into the back of Tim Top Tim. Rob Barth, his next target. There is Barth. He's behind the GT2 Porsche as well. Jonathan Rowland struggling with that car. On board with Sugden now. Down to Quarry, looking for the inside line. No, Kelvin's got it, so Tim will cut in and try and take the inside line on the way out. Can't do that, but they're all queuing up behind this slower silver GT car.
Oh my word, does that bring the memories back or what? How incredible was it seeing that? And that was the first time that the Power Tour, the British GTs we had a look at there, made their appearance at Castle Combe. 20,000 people there. Look at the banks, absolutely packed. Beautiful weather. That's not always there, as we know, but we definitely had the good weather on that particular weekend. Thank goodness for that. Absolutely incredible action, incredible cars, and I can see all the comments piling in and the memories coming back. Evening, Tim, dilly, my friend. Tim Perry saying about Tim Harvey talking about Castle Combe there. I knew you'd like that, where he was talking us around that one. He did well. I agree, Ben Hayward. Did he say bumpy? Oh dear, agreed. There. What did Howard call them? They're undulations, I think. That's what we're supposed to call them. Gerald says, thanks for waking my Alexa up. Hey, what a compliment, eh? Thunderstruck. That's what the atmosphere was like there for you all. Our very own Emma Strawford. Evening, boys and girls. Oh, the memories. Matt Parr, one of our own saloon car drivers. Hopefully you'll be back this year, mate, and we'll see you back out in the saloons. But all of you saying, oh, I remember this so well. We used to have great racing. We still do now, Paul, I can assure you. It's just not British GT at the moment. Wow, mega memories. I can remember watching this as I assume you mean kid from Quarry. Brings back some amazing memories. I might have been sat next to you, Matt, for all we know, because I agree, I remember it. Steve Burns, my deputy as a safety car observer. Nathan Sutton, if only they had the stomach to come back. I agree, let's not get political about this. Now, listen, you've seen it. We've got a very special guest tonight that's joining me on the show. And you all will know him as the voice, certainly of British touring cars on ITV4, occasionally other ITVs, as well as we saw over the last year or two. But also does an awful lot of GT racing, GT World Challenge around the world and everything. And he's kind of like probably one of my mentors in reality. He also had an awful lot to do with bringing these guys to our circuit as well. He'll probably back me down on that one, saying it. I think his email said a little bit to do, but that's because of the humility of the man. I'm going to bring him straight in. It is David Addison. Good evening, sir.
Evening, Chris. God, that brought back memories, I tell you. And you were perhaps talking up Tim Harvey, because bear in mind, as I was watching that, I thought, where did he finish in this race? And the programme is to hand. Well, Harvey's Viper didn't finish the hour. It didn't even get to 40 minutes. So whatever wisdom he was imparting on that bit to camera before he went off and ate cake clearly didn't do much good, because the car didn't finish. It's amazing how your memory kind of clouds things as well, because I hadn't really remembered how few Pucker GT cars there were in that race compared to what was GTO, the second class that went through different name changes, NGT and GT2, and on it went. But the main GT class was a little bit short on numbers, and yet the GTO, the second class, was, as you saw on that bit of action, not only good on numbers, but really good on racing. And yeah, it takes me back, I tell you. It makes me feel old, but it takes me back.
Remind me, in that year 2001, were you up in our commentary box? Yes,
Yeah,
because those guys did the TV, but you were at our circuit.
Yeah.
You had the better job.
I had a better view. I mean, I don't think Martin and Ben were there from memory because it probably clashed with something else. But I'd started commentating at Combe, doing occasional events mid-90s after Richard Davis retired and went off to Spain. And Howard said to me, you know, can you come and do a few? And I did. And so I'd got a toe in the door at Castle Combe, if you like. But then one of the things we did for Power Tour, which started in 2000, was to have a travelling team. So it was the same team of people with also a radio station that went with it for certainly 2000 and half of 2001. So it was the same travelling team. So there was a Castle Combe link, but also the F3 GT link that was there as well.
Yeah, the wonderful Power Tour. And in fact, that first year there was for us the last year before it became a BRDC championship, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole thing became very political, really.
So have I just heard?
Well, again, you see, that email you sent saying, do you want to come and talk about this? And I started to think, well, you know, because there was more to it than the racing. You kind of have to go right back to 1993, in a sense, because that's when the TOCA package was created. And what the TOCA package did was make, understandably, the Touring Car Championship a very strong day out. Alan Gow I remember talking to him 100 years ago about this. He'd been to Alton Park. I was there even before I was commentating. And it was BTCC, 1990, Alton Park. And the support races were things like the MG Car Club, Cockshoot Cup, Formula V, local Formula Ford, the old Formula E, the original Formula E, wishbone suspension Formula Ford, all of which gave terribly good racing. But Alan absolutely hated it because it was pretty low rent. It wasn't what he wanted to see his championship associated with. So he talked to the manufacturers, got the support races, TOCA package grew. Great. So that was one thing that was suddenly made very strong and with good intention. But what that had the knock-on effect of doing was taking away things like Formula Ford or Formula Vauxhall that could be a headline race meeting in themselves at a Castle Combe or a Mallory Park of the time. So for 94, the BRDC and the BRSCC and the BARC got together and said, right, what can we do to, if you like, make something out of what's left? And so something called BBM, the Best of British Motorsport, was created, which was things like Formula 3, GT, which had started in 93. So that was still fairly nascent, but it was growing. National Saloon Cup, Rover Turbo. So it was, if you like, it was the next level down, but could still be a good race meeting in itself. Right, there's more to this, so yawn with your mouth closed. Fast forward to 1998, 99, Nicola Fulston does a deal with Bernie to get the Grand Prix at Brands Hatch. Why is that relevant? It's relevant because in order for the sale of Brands Hatch Leisure to earn lots of money, it had to have lots and lots of things to up its value. So a Grand Prix contract, whether it could have a Grand Prix was a moot point, but a Grand Prix contract made Brands Hatch Leisure a more sellable proposition when it was put on the market. It was also, Brands Hatch Leisure, the majority shareholder in something called BMP, British Motorsport Promoters, which had the rights to the British Superbike Championship. And that was another way of making that stronger, making BHL strong, because it had the biggest foot, if you like, in BSB. So then BMP went after the touring car rights and wrestled them away or won them or took them off, depending on how you want to look at it, from TOCA, from Alan Gow. So that's why Alan disappeared for a few years, went off to do other things. And BMP had the rights to touring cars. So you've got all of this going on the BHL side of things. At the same time, Silverstone was pretty busy trying to work out whether it could keep a Grand Prix or rent Silverstone to Brands Hatch Leisure, which was now becoming Octagon, in order to fulfill that Grand Prix contract. But at the same time, on its domestic front, if you like, Roger Etzel, who was the Silverstone sales and marketing director, had worked out that when they put on a Formula 3 GT type meeting at Silverstone, with a bit of effort and a bit of promotion, they could get 7,000-8,000 people, a decent crowd. Headline sponsor for the event, I think we had Trebor Mints for one, we had different computer people, local radio stations, all sorts over the years. And Roger thought, if we do that at Silverstone, and yet we as the BRDC take the same race meeting to, say, Alton Park or Donington, why does nobody come? So that got him thinking about what could happen with F3 GT, with a bit of promotion, and if the circuit's bought into it. And it was from that Power Tour was born. And it up to a point was a success. Some people said it was a disaster and it wasn't any good because it was full of air displays and marching bands. Well, it wasn't. They were an add-on, but it was a easy stick to hit it with. But it was popular up to a point because it was getting good TV through, as you saw, the Hay Fisher coverage. It was getting good crowds trackside, and it was getting traction in the press. Matt James at Motorsport News was big behind it. And the last thing that BMP, now as the touring car rights holder, needed was for any bastard child to get popular and threaten BTCC, which was having a bad patch because, again, around this time, we'd gone from the end of Super Touring into BTC Touring, new regulations. So it was a real turmoil for the industry as a whole. Anyway, halfway through 2000, we're getting up to speed now, getting close. Halfway through 2000, the Brands Hatch Leisure Group of Circuits said, right, we're not having Power Tour next year. It's banned. We don't want it. And Robert Fernell at Donington, who had a great relationship with Nicola Fulston, said, well, I'll join that camp. And Dennis Carter at the BARC trotted on behind and fell in. So there was going to be Silverstone, and that was about your lot. So Roger Etzel and the BRDC needed some new circuits. And places like Knockhill, Rockingham, it's frightening to think that Rockingham wasn't yet built and is now closed in that short span that we're talking about here of Formula 3 at Combe, and Castle Combe. They were the three that were independent circuits and could host the event. And it came that towards the end of 2000, there was an open evening at Silverstone, and those three circuits did a presentation. The circuits hosted around the following year. We went from there. And Rockingham came on stream when Rockingham was able to open. Before long, the Power Tour concept had been taken over by BMP. So having been able to kill it from the outside, BMP brought it into the family and decided at the end of 2001, yes, that they dropped the Power Tour tag and it would just go back to being an F3 GT type meeting. So it fell away from being a package with the constant races, but there was still a sort of F3 GT moniker attached to the event. So really, by the time we got to Combe in 02, 03 onwards, they were F3 GT race meetings, a bit like, actually, you still have that tag today, even though it's a different type of Formula 3. Right, well, that's got an hour done. Nice to see you all. Thank you very much. History lesson over. Good night.
Nice to see you.
That was that. Yeah, it was hugely political. It really was.
Motorsport and politics. I couldn't believe you'd suggest such a thing.
No, well, precisely. But the good thing is actually that it all survived. And you know, when people came to Castle Combe and saw 20,000 people, they thought actually there's something good here. If this package of races and this circuit can generate this audience, it can't be all bad.
Well, absolutely. And I tell you what, that's interesting that you said that it was just the 1 year that it was the I'm liking that.
Sorry. That's quack. That's a Belgian beer. Cheers. Enjoy your gin.
Thank you.
Apple needed after all this. Hang on. Oh.
The fact that it had only been a Power Tour 1 year that we had it at Castle Combe, so in 2001 presumably.
That's right.
And yet it's stuck in our head. And when we talk about it, because we all still reminisce, and I daren't even start scrolling down because I know loads of comments will have come in, and we'll get to those in due course. But we still talk about those being the halcyon days because it was amazing having them there. And yet we think of the Power Tour because, as well as the British GT and the F3, we think about things like, in particular, the TVR Tuscan Challenge,
which again used to come to Combe as a headline event anyway. And then kind of got, because it was good, it got not swallowed up. That's wrong, but I mean it was the right fit for the F3 GT package. I mean, Power Tour was again Roger Etzel's idea to give this a name, to give it a brand, and you're still talking about it now. So it clearly worked up to a point, and people said, "Oh, it's a silly name." You know, all the detractors right from day one. Oh, rubbish! What does it mean? Pointless. Well, perhaps it means a bit more to the outsider world than F3 GT. The whole idea was that it was a travelling tour of things that were powerful. Power Tour, not a bad idea. And again, I can remember BMP poo-pooing it. And then in 2001, we had Toka Tour. I don't know what that means. I mean, Alan Gow has always, if you listen to him in an interview, been very, very keen to emphasise the BTCC, not Toka, not touring cars, BTCC. That's that brand. And yet, for that period of time that BMP had it, it was Toka Tour. So if Power Tour was such a bad name, why did we have Toka Tour? Discuss.
We don't, David. We got to keep our jobs, so let's not.
There is that. You're also very naughty for getting me onto this, because I have had so many happy hours this week going through the program cupboard and reminiscing. I mean, there's a scary element in that I suddenly feel 20 years older. There's another scary element in how many drivers have just disappeared from the sport, from those entry lists in what was only really, if you like, a 5 or 6 year span. And so many that I'd forgotten about. And you think, oh yeah, the first Power Tour meeting, or the Power Tour year that we had it, there was, in those days, the Fiesta Championship had gone from Toka to Power Tour. Colin Turkington was in that. Colin Turkington can't have raced at Castle Combe very often. He didn't win. He was third, but he was in it. And Matt Pinney and Nick Padley, who were the top two, long since, sadly, disappeared from the sport. And yet Colin Turkington, he's coming on as a touring car driver. Yeah,
he is. He's done. He might have a future. I don't know. Yeah. Well, I mean, there was even names that I was suddenly seeing. I mean, some that are still heavily involved in sport in slightly different guises. Matt Nicol Jones. Oh. He was there. Rob Austin. I saw Rob Austin. Now, I know he's not on the touring car package anymore, but he was an almighty character for that. Saw him, and I think he was in one of the feeder series at that stage as well. But
I think he did Formula 3 in 02.
Yeah,
he says. I'm sure he did Formula 3 round about 02, and then he sort of went off and raced Ginettas. Hang on a second.
And the Ginettas, of course, appered on the tour on the package at Combe as well for.
That's right. Yeah, the Ginetta G20s we had.
Because I spotted even another name familiar to us at Castle Combe, Marcus Pye, on the entry list for one of those as well.
That's right. I think he did do a sort of guest drive. Yeah. Rob 02. Yeah. He drove for Alain Menu's team in F3. But, the entry lists, James Courtney that year, Alan van der Merwe, Richard Antonucci, Heikki Kovalainen, Robbie Kerr, Rob Austin, Michael Keir. Some names completely disappeared. Others, went on to achieve quite a lot. Which was always the case in Formula 3. I mean, was it 05, the final year, or 04? Certainly one of the years.
05.
In one of the years, we had Formula 3 history, because Castle Combe was the venue for the one and only Lola Dome victory. Danny Watts won, which was a rare day to break the Dallara monopoly. So, there was that little bit of history attached to Castle Combe as well.
I love it. I mean, I was looking through the results of it and just sort of seeing the cars, the names, both in the single seat of the F3s and in the GTs. I mean, it was just special. I've always said, and I'd imagine you do the same, David, in your commentary role, is to try to encourage people to pay attention to the names that you're seeing out racing each time, that at the moment they might not be household names, but I do it now. When you look back and go, wow, that superstar in whatever discipline they're in, you kind of go, well, I remember when they just started out.
Exactly.
And you have to pay attention, don't you? Because you never know who will and who won't. You said about the names that have disappeared. You can't guarantee it. Sadly, it's not always the talent that guarantees that they make it.
03, you had Piquet. Was it the following year you had Bruno Senna? Formula 3 has always been a tough one for any circuit or promoter to really get behind, because you can only really promote the people in it once they're not in it, if that makes sense. Only when they've gone on to do something can you really start to bang the drum. Come and look at these people this year in Formula 3, because they might be as good as these people you've heard of. It's a tough one, but having the names of Senna and Piquet certainly helped for that time.
I remember. Sorry.
I was going to say, the other problem is Formula 3 never generates the same type of racing as, say, Formula 4 because of all the aero, but you have to deal with that and accept it for what it is.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the beauty for those things around Castle Combe, though, is the fact that the aero on them means that they're able to carry so much of that speed through a lot more of the corners that us as the regulars are able to sit there and go, that's just insane.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it.
That was one of the fears that the teams had coming into 01 rather. And the point you made about having involvement in getting the teams there, I mean, it was a minor involvement, but I think it might have been a Saturday morning, but Howard having agreed that he would have a round of the championship, needed the teams on board. And Formula 3 teams were a funny lot because they liked going to Silverstone where they had big garages. They didn't really want to go to a field, particularly. They didn't want to go to a circuit where there weren't pit garages. And so Howard invited them to come and have a look at Castle Combe. And this is my tiny role in it, if you like. So I went and stayed with Howard and Pat, and probably Emma, I think, was there on a Friday evening from memory. We went to the circuit on the Saturday, and Howard put on a presentation, and the teams and any F3 driver that had come along were given a lap round the circuit to go and have a look at the place, to see the runoff, to understand the undulations, to have a look at where the curbs were, and to show them what Castle Combe was all about, because they'd all said, oh, it's too fast, it's too dangerous, it's too basic. They hadn't set foot in the place.
Yeah.
So this was an important thing to show the teams actually what it was all about. And it was politely pointed out by the late Jeremy Lord, who was then in charge of FOTA, the Formula 3 Association, that stop moaning about not having a pit garage, because you don't always get garages, for example, at Donington. When it's an F3 GT meeting, they had to share the garages between F3 and GT. So if you went to Donington twice of a year, one time it would be F3 that got the garages and the other would be GT. Alton Park, right. Bit the same. There was always going to be a compromise. So moaning about garages isn't a problem. You operate out of an awning and it's all fine. And I seem to remember Howard had to tarmac a bit more of the paddock. But the circuit, to its great credit, and Howard and Rodney Gooch, of course, who was there at the time as well, all the rest of it, they put a huge amount of effort in to give the teams what they wanted and to look after them. And on a weekend like you just shown the footage of, with the sun shining and that many people, you'd have to be a pretty harsh so-and-so to not be impressed and not enjoy the weekend. Because it was a great showcase for the circuit and for those championships. And I seem to remember saying at some point over the course of the weekend, it was like the Castle Combe Grand Prix. That's how it felt. You had this massive crowd, lots of people who'd not been to Combe before or for a long time, attracted by F3 and GT. And added to which, Castle Combe, I think, has always been a bit unique in having people that go to a race meeting for a day out. They're not necessarily motor racing fans, but they go to Castle Combe as visitors, as you might go to the zoo, or you go for a day out. So you had all of these different groups of people, transient fans, regular Combe fans, hardcore F3 GT motor racing fans who, were going to come and see it. And added together, it was quite an atmosphere. It was quite a weekend, yeah.
It was, and I remember being there, and like you mentioned, PK, and I'm sure I remember PK. I'm sure I remember helicopters. Let's just say that. I remember helicopters making their appearances as well, which again is not something we see all that often there, but it's always a welcome addition because you're on for something special if they're making an appearance. I mean, from your perspective as well then, David, I'm guessing, were you up in the main commentary box?
I was for all of them, yes. Yeah, for all of those.
Which, again, knowing that view is that for you to be looking round and seeing that crowd there.
Oh, absolutely. And the other good
thing,
on
it, don't you?
Yeah, and it's, you'll know yourself, Chris, being in the main, well, I say the main box, initially, I haven't been to Combe for so long, but the circuit commentary box is still, is it not, the very top floor, first door? Yes.
Yes.
Because I know when I've been, the last couple of visits to Combe, we're doing those motors live race days, yeah. I was downstairs, so yes, get my bearings again. But from up there, you could see people walking in, they'd come over the bridge at camp and walk in front of you. So as you're in the middle of talking about a qualifying session or whatever it might be, or the build up to a race, you might spot a driver or a team manager and you can make some reference and they look up and give a suitable signal. And there was that element to it as well. And it emphasised the friendly nature of Castle Combe, that you can almost see your mates walking in and they can give you a wave, which you get at a club meeting, but you don't get at major events. And don't forget, that was an international, those were international race meetings. They all ran under an international permit. They were proper international events.
No, exactly. And I mean, I know that there's heartbreak that we can't get that. And there's a number of reasons like the noise levels or whatever else, sadly. And hopefully, never say never. I'd love to see that kind of thing back again, but we have to accept certain circumstances. Even though, when was the circuit open? No, let's not go there. But
one of the other things, just to throw into this, which again I got in the back of my mind. Did I dream this? In 2002, another of the issues that Howard and Rodney were having was testing, because if you want to go and test at Combe, you pay with your back teeth, effectively, because dates are so rare, aren't they? It's not the easiest of places to go testing, a bit like Thruxton, whereas you can go to Silverstone or Donington or Pembrey, God's sake, and drive around forever and a day. So in 02, Formula 3 GT was there at the end of June. In early June, there was a race meeting with testing in it. Do you remember this?
No.
Right.
Well, I probably wasn't aware of this going on.
Just so happens. So it was the Vanitech Computers Racing and F3 GT test day, which rolled off the tongue. And so you had qualifying for the local championships and Sports 2000, plus 2 test sessions each for Formula 3 and GT cars. So that was their testing, because they couldn't do it anywhere else. So there was a half a race meeting and half a test day. It was only a one-day Saturday meeting, I think. Yeah, and that's when the F3 GT testing was put in, because that was another of the problems that the circuit was facing. The teams were saying, can't do enough testing. Oh, well, got the answer to that. So it was very enterprising of Howard and Rodney to do that.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that. I'll be honest with you. Yeah, I completely forgotten that. And that does make sense, because, again, people would have just loved to have seen those cars there at the end of the day. I mean, we've been blessed in our own Castle Combe GT Championship over the last couple of years. We've had some pretty amazing machinery dropping up. And I don't know whether you've seen the entry lists that have been coming in for that, but it's been some pretty impressive kit. And there's just this hunger for that kind of thing. We're going to have F3 Cup here this year, so we're going to have some of those cars that were there making an appearance. Not necessarily the numbers that we'll have had there, but still the impressive performance of them. And one of the other things, and I know you'll be fully aware of this as well, David, is one of the unique things about Castle Combe is that it doesn't matter what meeting it is, we'll always have a good sized crowd. It's just when we had the likes of the British GT and F3, we had massive crowds. Absolutely. Like I say, Castle Combe it always struck me as a day out, especially a bank holiday Castle Combe. Did I do many of those? 2 or 3, I think. And I did the midsummer meetings for a couple of years, and there was a 2-day September. But yeah, if it was a major meeting, there were always big crowds, because you had your good base to start from, as you say, and then you added to it. And the atmosphere was always good. Even the first meeting I ever did at Combe, I went out to Old Paddock. It was the first one of the year, 95. It was in those days a BRSCC Southwest Centre, long before Castle Combe Racing Club had started. And there I was at Old Paddock, and it was just good old-fashioned club racing, no frills, but cracking racing. That was before the S's and Bobbies were put in, so it was a very, very rapid lap indeed. Huge accident in the Alfa Romeo race, as I remember. Oh God, really? Oh jeepers! Well, I mean, the little clip that I put together at the beginning of some of the footage that was done is that just before where I came in, with the grid walk, is said about the fact that it was so fast they'd added the 2. We're not supposed to call them chicanes either, but we will do for the sake of this, obviously, S's and Bobbies, to slow them down. But as she said, is that it didn't really. It's still an incredibly fast lap with some twiddly bits thrown in. And it's like, yeah, that does kind of sum it up, really. It's just an incredibly brave circuit.
It is. I think they were put in for the right reasons. I would argue that the second of the chicanes was in the wrong place. I think it had to be there to bring the speed down for Camp Corner. I would love to have seen the chicane into Camp, a bit like the old Woodcut at Silverstone, but I think the problems of doing that were that they'd still be arriving at Camp too quickly. And if anybody was going to have an accident through a chicane, there wasn't enough runoff. So it's probably in the right place. But I think it would have been brilliant to have had it at the end of the lap, like Woodcut, to build it up into the chicane for the last time. Eyes right, especially in Formula Ford, who's going to come out, brackets at all, or who's going to come out first. And that would have, I think, made for some good racing. But yeah, the circuit really had no option. The MSA as well said, you need to do this, and Howard Strawford had no choice, really.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier about the TVR Tuscans, and of course it was an incident with those that sort of like started seeing the catch fencing going up as well, and all these things that, people gripe and moan about at the time, but it's like, well, it's a bare essential. You now look at that footage and suddenly go, oh my God, there was no fencing there, especially on the pit wall. You kind of go, oh my God, there was no fencing there. So it's amazing how the mind changes and kind of now sees this as the normal, thank goodness. And It is what it is. I mean, let's just quickly catch up with so many comments. In fact, I've just scrolled down and it's jumped right to the bottom. Everybody's piling in with so much to say. Jamie Peters Ennis, evening guys, have a great show. I loved it when Power Tour came to Combe. Just a shame that noise and other restrictions. I mean, we don't see British GT and F3 there anymore. And I agree. I mean, David, you still do the TV coverage of these events, and you and I end up catching up with each other at them because I'm doing more and more of them. I think I'm doing about just over half of their events this year, so I shall see you again at them. And they are special events. Even I don't know about you, whether you've still got, and I think you do from when we chat, is that still that twinkle when you walk down the paddock and see the trucks and the gear and everything from the British GT teams, and then see the cars, then hear the cars, then feel the cars.
Absolutely. Especially in GT terms. It does. No, you're absolutely right, Chris. It does. And that's why I fell into this in the first place. It wasn't to watch television, which is how life has sort of become in commentary booths these days. It was to look at cars. And going off at a tangent, one of the great sadnesses of last year was that at a number of events, I couldn't go trackside. I wasn't allowed. I had to be in a TV compound. I was at the event, but rather divorced from the action. And whichever event it is, I always try. Snetterton British GT as an example. You were toiling away in the pits in the cold and the rain. Yes. And for qualifying on the Saturday, I went and stood out trackside, and I could hear cars and see cars. And it's not only fascinating, but I also think it's quite an important part of the job. So yes, I do still get that tingle, especially for GT cars, because I absolutely love GT racing. I'm not just saying that because of the role that I have within it with SRO, but I find the cars fantastic. And one of the highlights, and I bang on about it, I know, but it's that they are different shapes and sizes and different sounds. They're not wind tunnel specials like a single seater is. All of these different manufacturers come to the table with a different way of cracking the nut. You know, you look at the Bentley as a completely different shape and size from the Audi, from the Ferrari, whatever it might be. And thanks to the balance of performance, you get them all to pretty much equate and deliver great racing. So I'm still getting that tingle, and long may that continue.
No, absolutely, and that's a key thing. I don't think it'll ever go, which is shown by the longevity that you still get that. Mine's only about 10 years that I've been doing it and still get it. I shall see you at Brands Hatch actually for the GT World Challenge event as well. I'm covering that one, which I can't wait. I've covered Blanc a few years ago. I did Blancpain as was the Sprint Challenge at Brands Hatch before it goes to Silverstone, and that that's amazing. I've covered the GT4 Euro event that was like, oh crikey, 40 or something stupid like that.
That was the Manic one where they had to stagger the pit stops, didn't they? Because the pit lane wasn't big enough. So you had two different windows in the same race. That's right. Yes,
it was nuts. I mean, and not just that, is that there was so much carnage because there was just too many of them, and you never thought you'd say that about GT racing, did you? Just because of the basics of the expense of those cars, let alone anything else.
But GT4 has been the big success story of recent years because when it started, it was a good idea, but it was a bit like glorified production sports car racing, if you like. It was a tuner that made a car homologated. So if you wanted to race your BMW, you went to the nominated tuner, and they gave you back a race-ready BMW to go GT4 racing. It was the Z4 initially, the long bonneted Z4. Well, over time, it's changed so that the manufacturers homologate the cars themselves. And that's absolutely fantastic because you've got a turnkey race car. It's like having the motor racing version of a USB stick. You get it and you plug it in and it works. And off you go. And so all of these wealthy AMs or young up-and-coming drivers that want a GT career can get into a turnkey race car that doesn't really have any major dramas because the manufacturers are building them so well. And off you go. And Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, Porsche with the Cayman, on goes the list. It's a market, an area that's absolutely growing all the time. You can see why, really, because it's a good starting point if you want to be a GT driver. But if you're an AM, it's good racing, but without the pressure of GT3. One of the points that John Watson often makes in our GT World Challenge broadcasts is looking out for what I call the guns. He calls them the hot rods. So, you're Jean-Claude Van Wallet and you're out to enjoy yourself. And yet you've got half a dozen ex-Grand Prix drivers or Le Mans winners, whatever it is, tearing down on you. You know, you spend your whole hour in the car that you've paid for, looking in the mirror and panicking. It's not for you. But GT4 is perhaps a slightly more relaxed environment in which to take part. That brand's year, was that the year the McLaren went over the barrier at Hawthorne, the Van der Ende?
Yes. Yes,
yes,
I do.
Yes, remember that
now.
quite graphically.
Yes, quite
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that was a bit mad. I mean, it was just mayhem. It was an amazing spectacle, but it was mayhem. I don't know whether you've got a good idea on this. I mean, it was probably only. I mean, I've lost track of time now, if I'm honest. But my mind tells me a couple of years ago there was a claim that GT3 was dying out. GT4 was going to be the overtake of it. And you know, and we had examples of watching GT3s trying to race around the GP circuit at Brands Hatch, and it was difficult to overtake, and so they were limited where they were any good on. That argument seems to have petered out, and in fact, and I know we discussed this at Snetterton, is that suddenly the majority of the field in the British GT was GT3 cars. So what's happened? What's changed that round?
I think part of the story behind it was being fueled a bit by the media. And a team manager or two in GT4 said, "Oh, you know, look, you know, we're getting stronger all the time. This ought to be for us." But there are still more manufacturer contracted drivers in GT3, and a GT3 car is a more expensive proposition, and therefore it's good for a manufacturer to sell. So if you're doing your job properly as a brand, you can sell a more expensive bit of kit to a customer. Plus, many of those teams already had the cars anyway. They just needed to use them. The manufacturers like Aston, like Lamborghini, for example, have got factory contracted drivers. So you go and buy, as I know, because you're about £2 off, I think, aren't you, buying your next GT3 championship car, Chris? So you go and buy your Aston Martin, and they say, "Thank you, Mr. Dawes, right, you can sign here, and we will give you a Johnny Adam, for example, or whoever, you know, as a factory driver. That's part of your deal." So the manufacturers want to sell the cars because it A, helps with the revenue, and B, it gets the drivers in there. That's not quite the same for GT4, really, because manufacturer contracted drivers are in GT3. GT4 is actually a bit harder in some respects for teams because you've got to have two paying drivers. But for GT3, you've got one, but you might have to pay a bit more. But then it's a good sell that we're going to give you a top dollar GT3 driver. So it's you know, I'm glad I don't run a team, but it was interesting last year that more of the GT4 teams seemed to be struggling actually than GT3 once we got back up and running in August.
Yeah, absolutely, it was intriguing. It really wasn't what I was expecting to see. Although then we've got the news that Bentley have abandoned the GT3 program.
They've abandoned it, as I understand it, as a factory team. I've got to say, I've never quite understood how we had a Bentley factory team, because I was always under the impression that GT3, because this was Stefan Rattel's desire, he doesn't like manufacturers, because manufacturers come and go, spend a lot of money and drive people. You know, you've seen it in Formula One, you've seen it in sports cars, you've seen it in Formula E, you've seen it in rallying. Go back to super touring. Manufacturer A comes in, spends money like it's going out of fashion. Nobody else can spend that. They fizzle away. There's a change in the boardroom at whichever company. That person who is now the incumbent doesn't like motorsport. He puts that sponsorship budget into Opera, for example, and suddenly you're left with a great big hole. So Stefan always wanted manufacturers to build cars and teams to run them. Well, I suppose notionally that's what happened, because it was M Sport that ran the Works Bentley, but it was always a Bentley Motorsport project. But you're right, they've said we're not going to run these as a factory program, but customers that have still got the cars, like a Team Parker Racing or whoever, or if there are teams in GT Cup, for example, will still be there with support for you, with parts, with whatever you need. But it does mean that you've got more drivers on the job market now. So the Bentley factory drivers of last year are now busily looking for a berth somewhere else. So I think you will still see Bentleys, but probably at a more reduced domestic level. And as those cars become more antiquated, less competitive, then I think the Bentley name will disappear really through natural wastage, just because the current car's not being developed. There isn't, as far as we know yet, unless it's a hybrid or an electric style vehicle, there isn't a car to replace the Continental GT3, because electric GT racing can't be far away.
Agreed.
So I think the Bentley will fizzle away, but that's just by time. Like earlier incarnations of Porsche 911s have gone because the next one comes along. If there isn't one to come along and that car's not competitive, it'll just get parked.
I've got an annoying mental block on last year, ex-British touring car that was racing in British GT.
Chap called Rob Collard.
That's the one. Thank you. My mind went completely then. Rob Collard. I loved the interview that he did, where he'd done an awful lot of racing, an awful lot in British touring cars, and the first time he got into the McLaren he was in, wasn't he? Lamborghini. Sorry, is that he actually. I can't remember whether they said he actually threw up or he was about to throw up. It was just totally different to everything that he was used to, and he really struggled to get to grips with it.
Yeah, no, you're right. He did throw up. He admitted. I think I interviewed him at Silverstone for the last round for the TV coverage, and I like Rob a lot. I'm not just saying that, but in touring cars, he was always a good interview, and he's very honest. Lots of drivers could have hidden that. Rob, he was completely open about it. And it was the aero, it was the grip that the car was developing, which was alien to him. I mean, Rob started off in hot rod racing like his dad, his late father, then came into Formula Ford, Vectra Challenge for a bit, and then into touring cars, where he's remained pretty much ever since. Very different types of racing car. I mean, the other fascinating thing was he never raced on the Grand Prix circuit at Silverstone because, of course, touring cars in his lifespan have never raced on that. They've done the international or the national, but never the Grand Prix circuit. He won his class at Spa in the 24 hours. Never raced at Spa. That was all new. He did World Challenge Europe as well with Barwell. So he went to a lot of new circuits last year, which I think he found a real challenge. But he adapted very well. And completely honest, completely open about it. And he came as a GT rookie. He was mighty impressive. He really was last year. And he deserved that championship, didn't he?
Yeah, 100%. It was amazing. I just love that insight that it gave you an idea that it made him that ill, the amount of aero. So it goes to show it's not just suddenly jump into it. People have this misconception that gives somebody additional aero and bigger slicks or whatever, and it's like an electric wizardry, and you've just made their life easy for them. It's like, no, you've now got to learn a whole different ball game.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything he'd learned in 20 odd years of touring cars, he had to unlearn and start afresh. But he did it, and that was again one of the fascinations of last year. And don't forget, he did that in what you might call half a season. It was all crammed in, so he didn't have the luxury of a whole load of testing in between races, because you're almost moving on from one to the next, if not with the British GT calendar, with his World Challenge races thrown in, because he was doing the endurance events as well. Now, okay, that gave him a bit more mileage, and it gave him, you could argue, a bit more testing. But for everybody, it was a very compacted calendar last year, and he had to adapt in a very short space of time, and he did it.
In terms of GT racing as a whole, we're talking obviously British GT, the great days of having it at Castle Combe, but GT racing as a whole is in massively rude health, isn't it? And I think that the big change has come. We touched on things like pro drivers, and not just the top level pro drivers that suddenly, Johnny Adam, right, you plug him in, you bought that car, therefore you get that driver. There's a lot of youngsters that are, earning a living from it in different ways. And if you ask a young driver, right, what do you want to do? What's your goal? What's your ambition? Back in the day, it used to be, I want to be a Formula One driver. And there's been this realization that the likelihood is pretty darn slim unless you're born. You've got to be born a billionaire to become a millionaire, basically.
That's right,
and,
absolutely.
And that's,
absolutely.
And in GT racing, that's where there's an awful lot more drivers required. There's a lot of championships, a lot of healthy championships around the world. And you said about the wealthy AMs that sort of come in and go, right, I want to race, but I'm not very good. Therefore, I'm going to get myself a pro. And they know that there's a limited of the top level pros, and yet you've got this amazing pool of talent that are still making their way to that top level, that are worth the money for them to kind of go, right, come and drive with me, teach me at the same time, and someone that's going to get us through the ranks as we're in a race. It's where people are trying to go to make a living nowadays.
Absolutely right. If you're an AM and you have a GT3 or a GT4 car, that car holds its value in a sense as well, because you can race it almost anywhere, any weekend. You know, that car, your GT3 Aston that you're about to buy, for example, you could race in British GT, in World Challenge Europe. You could get it out to Asia. You could get it out to America. You could race it in a Creventic event. You could go and race it in the what was the VLN as was it, the Nürburgring Endurance Series. You could race it in the ADAC GT Masters. You could race it in the Castle Combe GT Championship. It would fit into that.
Absolutely.
You know, it could race in all sorts of things. So you buy a car like that, you've got a huge number of opportunities to go and race it, budget permitting. You've also got lots of different places to race, depending on what you want to do. There's a long list of where you can race it, but where do you want to go and race it? If you want to race in your back garden, as it were, you can. But if you want to go to some nice foreign places and learn about some new circuits and experience different cultures, you know, GT racing is there for you. I remember the late Jerry Marshall talking to me not long before he passed away about having a year of racing with Max Rostrom in historic touring cars in the FIA Championship, and what good fun it was going to places like Monza after a long time of having only raced in the UK. And it's opening people's eyes to new circuits and to, you know, travel and all sorts of things. And that's another reason I think why GT racing has caught on for the AMs. Plus, people like being involved in something that's successful. So if it's a success, it must be good. Therefore, I want to be involved in it. So there are lots of reasons why the AM likes it. From the pro driver's point of view, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a very good way of earning a living because you can be racing with somebody any weekend. And we're not just talking GT categories. There are GT classes, of course, within Asian Le Mans, within World Endurance, within European Le Mans. So a Johnny Adam, a Matt Griffin, whoever it might be, you know, they can bounce from customer to customer, from championship to championship, pretty much every weekend. And it's interesting, you're absolutely right, that when you look at young drivers coming into Formula 4 for the single-seater, if you like, bottom rung, the days of motor racing ambition, F1 world champion, now largely seem to say win Le Mans 24 hours. And there is that acceptance, You're absolutely right, that it's a very hard way to make a living in F1. Sports cars, GT racing is a better option. And I suppose actually it's perhaps shown by the fact that a modern day F4 grid is barely 20. Formula 3 hovers around 20. Go back to those Castle Combe F3 programs. Entry lists were pretty full back in 02, 3, 4, 5. You know, it's more expensive to race in single-seater racing, you could argue. But also, I just wonder whether it's not just the cost of it that needs addressing. It's the future for the driver after that. You do a year of it, but then what? Whereas in GT racing, you could very quickly start earning money. And if you're a single-seater team, then that puts you slightly on the back foot, doesn't it?
For me, my sort of if I was able, and I, you know, not everyone's going to agree with me, but my opinion on a good route is to start with something like Formula Ford, the real Formula Ford, i.e. no slicks, no aero, to learn mechanical grip.
Yep.
Then you can go into anything single-seater and still go into GT because of the fact that it's not about, oh, I need to have a roof over my head to go that route. You know, it actually isn't, because, again, you've now gone to dealing with aero. So if you do jump into Formula 4, Formula 3, those kind of things, you're still leaving open that route into GT racing very much, because as we said, with, you know, how it can make you sick with the amount of you know, downforce that the GT cars have, it's still a very logical route. But I've seen many people that have benefited from doing the likes of Formula 4. Of course, we got a very strong local championship at Castle Combe for our own, and we were the first one to have a local championship for the Formula Ford series as well. It gives you something like suddenly the rain starts coming down and your aero means nothing, your slicks mean nothing, and you're suddenly reliant on, okay, how can I control this thing round to the pits? Those people have got something extra over those that have missed the step of Formula Ford.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's another indication, slightly at a tangent, but it backs up your point, is people that have come from oval racing, because they are used to horrible track surfaces and being that close from a barrier on the outside with no runoff. If you remember the great Ian McKellar, who came out of Tuscans and British GT and won the championship, raced at Le Mans. The first time I saw McKellar race was at a Tuscan race at Alton Park, and he went round the outside of Ian Flux at Lodge, right? Lodge, Alton Park, Ian Flux, round the outside. And I thought, that's pretty impressive. And McKellar had never raced there before. But all that's from oval racing and great car control from that. So you're right. I agree that Formula Ford without wings, proper racing, teaches you all of those skills. And if you do then progress to an F4 with wings or an F3 and make the switch to GT, then yeah, you've got a bit of aero experience.
Yeah,
but a big GT car is still a very different proposition from a
100%.
Pretty light single seater anyway. Yeah.
But as is proven, you can be in British touring cars, which is the top level of tin tops, and yet still have to throw the rule book out if you go into GT. So everything's completely different. What I think they need to do, and a side point, and when we move on after I've thrown this grenade, is that I think they need to reduce the age that you're allowed to race the Formula Ford single seaters, because the problem is that people can go and race for British Formula 4 or something at what can they do that 14 years old.
Something like that, 14, 15, isn't it? Yeah.
Whereas you've got to be 16 before you can jump in a Formula Ford. And it's like, well, they're going, well, to career-minded drivers or parents, delete as applicable, that it could be that's a year or two suddenly lost in their mind, isn't it? And, you know, it's very competitive when you look at Verstappen suddenly jumping into Formula One as young as he was. So it's a difficult one, but you know, you look at GT racing. I have the privilege also of covering the likes of GT Cup, Brit Car. You know, again, both of those in rude health. You often worry that we've seen many things where suddenly something's been successful and someone's gone, "Oh, I'm going to go and create something like that," and then suddenly you kind of go, "Well, guys, why are you surprised that you've both got low grids?" Because they're sharing the kitty amongst them all, in effect. Whereas GT racing does not seem to suffer from that one at all, does it?
No, it doesn't, and in spite of GT Cup and Brit Car, in a sense, you know, GT Cup initially, because I remember doing the TV coverage of the highlights for the first one, it was really to cater for the old cars that were no longer competitive in British GT. Well, before long, people wanted to spend money on contemporary machinery, GT3 cars, to go winning. You know, Brit Cars had its good and its bad years, but that seems to exist quite nicely. And I don't think Brit Car is trying to be GT. It's trying to be long distance racing for people with either a GT or a touring car, and I think if it sticks to that, it'll be fine. But yes, you're right, the SRO GT championships largely do seem to continue to work, and one of the strengths, I think, is that Stefan has always been very good at building the grid from the back. So look after your AMs, look after your privateers, because the professionals, the teams at the front will come and go, but your AM, you want them to stay. And if you look after the back of the grid, the front will take care of itself. And a lot of the people on SRO grids, whether it's in Europe or the French championship that he runs or in Britain, have been with him for a long, long time. And it was talking to competitors that stimulated the idea of the GT Sports Club, which we've had at Silverstone. I don't think it might have been to Brands, but that was the single driver AM race. So you got 2 free practice, 2 qualifying, and 2 45-minute races. And that was for the AMs to have the circuit to themselves against other AMs, to go back to my point about looking in your mirrors for an hour and being terrified by the gun drivers. And so Stefan would say to some of the older AMs that had stopped racing or weren't doing as much, you know, what are you up to? Well, I don't want to race because ... If I could have the circuit to myself, if I were up against like-minded people, okay. So GT Sports Club was born. And I think that's another of the strengths, that largely, where possible, Stefan listens to his customers. And I'm not saying this as an SRO spokesperson, don't misunderstand me, but he understands what his competitors want, and where possible, tries to deliver that. Doesn't get it right all the time, but a lot of the time
he accepts his mistakes as well, and you're definitely not just sort of like blowing out. I've got on my notes here to make sure I go on to it, SRO and Stefan Rattel in general. Obviously, SRO is Stefan Rattel. He, you know, I use the throwaway phrase, he's a hero to me, and it is because I'm such a fan of GT racing in particular. I just love it to pieces. And he really has picked up and done wonderful things with it, you know, across the globe. He's an intriguing guy. You know, he's really done something special with it, made it work. And whenever I've been sort of like, say, down in the pit lane or on the grid and go to interview him, I mean, he's the coolest cat in the world, isn't he? He really is.
Absolutely.
He's so cool. And he comes across daunting, and you think, oh my gosh, can I really go and speak to him? You do. And he's like, bang, the nicest guy that you can meet.
Yeah.
He'll manage how much airtime you get, of course, but I think all top people do that. But he's just a really, really good guy, and he's done some special things. And long may SRO continue in reality, because they're keeping it good.
He's a fantastic enthusiast. You know, he is a racer at heart. He occasionally, when he gets the time, races. But again, the L program covered over my shoulder testifies that at the touring car meeting at Brands Hatch in 2001, Stefan Rattel was racing in the Lamborghini Super Trofeo, which oddly was a support race to a touring car meeting.
Wow.
Yeah, and there he was. And he loves Brands Hatch, which is why he's very keen to bring the sprint challenge as it is to Brands, because he loves the place. He's a racer at heart, and he's an enthusiast, and he wouldn't put himself through it year after year if he didn't care about GT racing, and if he didn't love seeing a full grid of GT cars blast away. You know, he's taken on for this year GT racing in Australia. He's got that. He's got Asia, which is in a real situation, of course, because of everything. So last year there was no GT World Challenge Asia at all. We had to have it purely as sim racing, which is something else we can discuss if we've got another hour. Sim racing. He's got World Challenge Europe. He's got World Challenge America. He's got British GT. He's got French GT, and then the support packages as well. Plus, he's got the GT4, he's got the sports club, and he never stands still. You know, there's always something else. Right, we're going to launch this for this year. We're going to have this. We're going to do this.
But they're all interlinked, though, aren't they?
They are, because where possible, he'll put them all on the same event, largely for television purposes. Because if you can have television for your customers, it's a good selling point. And therefore, there's SRO TV. If you're going to have television coverage of all of your categories, you want as many of them in one place at one time to keep your costs down on the TV production side of it. So that's why they're interlinked. Yes. So things like I forget the name of it. It's something like the Millennium Challenge, or is it the Rebellion Challenge, I think it is, for this year, which is a kind of AM GT2 category. You know, that will do a British GT and a World Challenge and a French GT. It'll drop in on different platforms for the amateur driver in the new GT2 car, like the new Porsche 935, which launched a couple of years ago. So that new iteration of the 935 drops into the current GT2. GT, it's all definitely confusing, but it works. And you're right, it is all interlinked. And
you've got all the derivatives that you were touching on, like some of the derivatives, like the Lamborghini Super Trofeo. You've got the Ferraris doing all sorts of things, you know, and these are kind of like derivatives that actually they can then go and race in these other GT championships as well. And everything is just bumper. And like you say, Castle Combe GT Championship. We've had some amazing Ferraris in it, Lamborghinis in it, you know, all sorts come in and making an appearance. And that is the thing. It's an amazing piece of kit that you go and race in something that is the same level as the top level pros doing. That's not something you can do, like say for a Formula One or whatever.
No, exactly. And you look at the people that have come into GT racing around the world, and they love it, and they are committed to it straight away. You know, take Giancarlo Fisichella, who's had a race-winning career in Formula One, and he's now one of the star Ferrari drivers in the factory squad, helping AMS develop. And he loves it because it's fierce racing. And when he's behind the wheel, he gives it absolutely everything. You don't find people like him with a chip on their shoulder thinking, I'm above this. I used to be a Grand Prix driver. Because it's great racing. So they get into it and off they go.
Well, Jenson Button running a team and racing as well, as we've seen. We know he obviously appeared at Silverstone in the car, and you know, it really is. And of course, a lot you touched on endurance racing, or you know, both the 24 hours, 12 hours, 6 hours, even. You know, that has become even more popular because you get a lot of bang for your buck in terms of seat time. So it's all brilliant. You did touch on it, and I will go back to it because it is important. The sim racing side of things, that obviously, sadly, with the you know, the pandemic has forced us to do a lot more on that. I think you have as well been doing a lot of commentary from here in the lounge on stuff like that. But SRO have even embraced that, in that there are points up for grab in the GT World Challenge this year.
Yeah, and there's going to be a sim competition on site at either some or most or all rounds. And yeah, it's something that you're right, they have embraced. There was the Assetto Corsa game anyway. And I think there was always an intention from SRO's point of view to do something more formal with that. And then last year's lockdown made it happen in a very short space of time. So we had if you take the SRO element in isolation, we had a one-off at the end of March as a sort of charity event, and it was a hit. And a championship was launched. And then the Asian series, as I said earlier, had to become purely an esports championship. But it's a way of keeping sponsors on side, because actually this is one of the things I discovered March last year when I did my first ever esports commentary was, bloody hell, these look like real racing cars. These look like proper pictures. And I was asked if I would do it, and I said to my wife, I've been asked to do one of these funny esports things. I'm not sure, you know, what do you think? And she said, oh, for God's sake, do it, because it'll get you out from under my feet, and it'll give you a purpose for a day and stop you being miserable. I mean, this was only March. I mean, Christ, what was it like by the start of July? I shudder to think. But anyway, here we go again this year as well. Anyway, so I sit at my computer and I am given by people in Italy pictures of GT cars, and I thought, wow, it's like watching the real thing with this. Yeah. And actually, Andy Merrick, who used to race in World Challenge Europe, lives not far away, and he was talking to me about it afterwards, and he said he was watching it and his wife walked in and saw this on the television and said, is that Monza? And Andy said, yes, it is. She said, why aren't you there? Have you been sacked? He said, no, this is sim racing. But the pictures were so good that she was thought. And I think one of the problems that sim racing had was every time anybody ever promoted it, all they ever showed you was people with steering wheels and pedals in front of them. They didn't show you how realistic the footage was. Yeah. And that for I mean, the first one we did, there was me, Watty, and Ben Constanduris, who knows about sim racing. Watty and I are, you know, utter dinosaurs to all of this. And we said to each other afterwards, it's actually, you know, very, very impressive. I think we might do another one of those. And the bug bit. And so yes, I've done GT racing and trucks, and I've got a touring car one to do on Saturday. There's a Power Max Racing backing a VRCC touring car series on Saturday afternoon. So yeah, actually sim racing is keeping me occupied. And I mean, you probably back me up on this, but it gives you a bit of a purpose, because you've got to do some homework and set some time aside and think about what you're doing. So it's been very interesting actually seeing how sim racing has developed and how it is developing. And I think a bit like we talked about GT cars a while ago, natural wastage, you know, there will be some of these categories, some of these series that fizzle out as drivers, real world drivers, just become too busy, and some will survive. And I think the best ones are those that mirror the real world, like SRO, like the European Truck Racing Championship, where they are the European drivers in their right colours. You know, there are others where it's a gang of mates having a laugh of an evening. You know, that's up to them. But you know, there's a bit of quality control in all of this. But I think some of the top ones that make sense will survive. And you can see, you know, as an example, I used to go out in February to India to go to the Madras circuit to do the MRF challenge. Well, I was there last year and we were all a bit downcast because even before thinking about a pandemic, the cars were getting old. MRF would need to invest a huge amount of money into a new grid of car with a halo to get the super license status to attract the drivers internationally. And we were thinking, we can't really see this happening. But what you could see happening is an MRF challenge, for example, as a sim racing series. So instead of having to build cars and fly people out to a country, you do 4 weekends of sim racing, and that's your challenge. That's your championship. Yeah. Why not?
I'm going to take a very quick break, play a quick video, comfort break, and we're going to be back with David Addison in a moment. Right, that's me top back up again. The current Mrs. Dawes, as we call her. Sadly, she's out. She's getting vaccinated this evening. She's in the medical profession. She's even going to be giving vaccines. So she's had to drive all the way down to Salisbury, so about an hour and a half each way. And the Diddy Dawes, therefore, I've got to make sure she's in bed. I've got to top the gin up. Everyone else who watches this show knows that normally she keeps me topped up. So,
I see. Well, you could have warned me it was drinks time, because mine's looking remarkably empty now. So,
no, sorry, mate. I should have.
I thought this was where you didn't bother to stop. I didn't know you were on a one-stop strategy. You see, I thought I was all set to go right the way through to the checkered flag, but oh no, okay.
Yeah, I'm semi-pro at this now. You see.
Yeah, clearly. Yeah.
So everybody has loved the events we had there at Castle Combe again. So many comments coming in. Even on, I know that I've not been able to get as much of you coming in. By the way, Emma Strawford says evening adders. And sends
hello, Emma.
Plenty of people welcoming you, and not just from here. The joy is we get people even from your neck of the woods up at Alton Park as well. The Knickerbrook Hardcore are watching as well, and of course that's your Combe as Combe is to me, isn't it? Really, they're your local circuit, and that kind of leads me nicely onto where I wanted to go now, if you may. And I know you being you are probably less pleased that I'm going to go this route, but I want to. Is that your career? Sorry, mate, but I want to just have we've had the pleasure of you coming to Castle Combe, listening to your voice on ITV. Where did it start and when?
The first commentary was 1991 at Donington. The desire to start commentating, I think, was one of those throwaway comments from my father, who actually I told this story to somebody else for an interview the other day, and it is absolutely genuine, and it's perhaps poignant because the one of the people I'm going to mention passed away very recently. 1984 British Grand Prix. Friday practice, Johnny Cecotto had a big accident out at Dingledale Westfield section of the circuit, red flag. The late Brian Jones was left to fill, because this is in the days really before you had TV at the Grand Prix where you could throw to a break or footage or whatever. And I think Radio Brands was in existence, but largely in those days it was up to Brian and Neville Hay and Paul Truswell, who would be the other commentators, to keep talking. And it was clearly a long stoppage because Johnny Cecotto was quite badly injured, badly broken legs. And as Brian was talking, I would sat next to my father, either correct or interrupt or get to the end of the point before him. And my father, probably to shut me up, actually said, "Oh, you could do this. You should do this." And I took it to heart. And I thought, that's not a bad idea. And there was absolutely no ambition whatsoever. Alton Park used to be my home circuit. The odd thing is, digression, that since I started commentating, I go to Alton Park twice a year, if that, 3 times at most. Very, very rarely do I ever go to Alton Park. But when I was a kid, it used to be every race weekend as best I could. And we used to go and watch at Knickerbrook, the good old Knickerbrook, before the chicane, when it was a proper corner, when men were men and sheep were nervous. And the commentary box at Knickerbrook, we used to sort of sit near that. And I'd worked out as a 16-year-old that if you sat up in that box, you probably got a very good view. You probably didn't have to pay to get in, and you were dry, which was quite key because it always seemed to rain. When you're a teenager and you've got to persuade your mum or your dad to take you to Alton Park, it always seems to rain. Yeah. When you're working there and you're indoors, it always seems to be hot. I don't know if you've noticed it.
Too hot. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so. I made a nuisance of myself. Mike Cookson was the regular Alton Park commentator, and Mike, bless him, let me do his lap charts for a year. I mean, this dates me because you don't really have a lap charter anymore because of the timing screens have rather got rid of that role. And at the same time, Mike did 2 or 3 events at Donington. And Donington's main commentator of that era was Robin Bradford. Robin was also responsible for looking after hiring and firing commentators for different clubs and circuits. And I said to Robin, I'd quite like a go at this, and I'd do Mike's lap charts. And I made a nuisance of myself. And Robin, as only Robin could, said to me when he eventually used me in 91, the only way to shut you up was to let you speak. I can see what you mean. Yeah. And it went from there. So 91, I was 18 when I started. And the first meeting I did was a Formula 3 meeting at Donington. The second meeting was a touring car meeting, which was in those days a BRSCC meeting, because there was, and that was to do the podiums at the end of races. Third meeting was an Alton Park OPRC, Alton Park Racing Club event, where I went out to Knickerbrook. And during the course of the season, and I probably only did, I don't know, 12, 13, 14. I mean, it wasn't that busy, but it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And in those days, as you've seen from that footage you showed at the beginning, Chris, Hay Fisher was very busy filming the sort of national categories for highlights. And I went and talked to Neville Hay and told him who I was and, you know, ever you need a spare pair of lungs kind of thing. And at the end of the year, we ended up commentating together on the RAC Rally. And slightly, this was at Clumber Park. So on the Sunday, you'd have all the spectator stages. And Robin Bradford organised commentators for those. So Neville and I did Clumber Park PA commentary together. I can't quite remember how this came about, but at the same time, I'd been asked by Eurosport to go and do their RAC rally coverage. And I said, well, I can't do the Sunday because I'm working in the UK, but I could do the nightly coverage from the Monday onwards. And they said, yes, that's fine. And I said, good, right, so that's all arranged. So bearing in mind, I'm at university in this incarnation. Well, what I hadn't totally computed was that Eurosport was in Paris. So I had to go from Clumber Park to Paris, which is where Eurosport was based. And I did these 4 nightly shows of the RAC Rally. Neville watched them, rang me up when I got back and said, come and work for me next year. So in 92, I started doing post-produced stuff for Hay Fisher, plus increasing amounts of circuit work. And on it went. And there was never, I promise you, there was never any real ambition to do it as a career. To begin with, I had a proper job working for the Chamber of Commerce in Manchester. I was their press officer. I then left that and went to work for another sort of government-funded Quango, and then a PR agency in Manchester. So it was only really in 2000 that I left all of that and started my own company with somebody else that was doing graphic design and PR work. And motor racing kind of took over from that. So non-motorsport work, which is what I wanted, disappeared, and we were so busy doing motorsport stuff. And then that in turn has changed to commentary, because really from about 2011, 2010, I suppose that's when it got busy, really only the last decade of doing live stuff. So Richard Hay, oh no, go back a bit. I went to Bathurst in 08, that's right. I did the track commentary at Bathurst for the 1000K, which was mega. A mate of mine called Aaron Noonan, who I'd known for a long, long time, got me out there because I'd done some Australian stuff before. And Noon said, we had this great ambition for me to go and do Bathurst with him. It never quite happened, but he got me out there. And in 08, he said, we've got a bit more of an international entry for the co-drivers. So, you know, it's a good sell. And that year, there was Matt Neal doing it with Paul Morris. There was Fabrizio Giovanardi in the second of the Vodafone 888 cars from memory. There was Boris Said, you know, the American Trans Am guy. And there was another European from memory. Alan Simonson, I think it was. Anyway, so Noonan said, look, are you interested? Because I'll talk to the TV guys, because the TV control the track commentary as well. Long story short, out I went and I did this. And I was introduced to a guy called Tony Cochran, who was the head of V8 Supercars. And he said, I was listening to you. He said, you're not bad for a POM. Thank you very much. He said, you know quite a lot about Australian racing. How is this? So I said, well, 2 reasons. One, I'm interested. And B, you know, you're paying me to come and do a job. I'll do my homework, do it properly. And we chatted for. And at the end of it was a drinks thing we were at. The end of the evening, this was Saturday, I think, of race weekend. I was leaving and I waved. And he beckoned me out. He said, come and see me tomorrow. I need to talk to you. Okay. I couldn't find him. It's like, you know, Bernie's bus in Formula One. Tony Cochran was as hard to find. And so I looked for him in the morning. We did the 6-hour race and I didn't see him. And I thought, oh, well, whatever it was, can't be that important. Went to the press conference at the end of the race, and there he was. So I wriggled through the traffic of all the people and said, did you want to see me? Ah, yes. Be in my suite in half an hour. And he told the PR guy, get David there. Right, okay. Suddenly this bloke is helpful. He's not been helpful all day, but he's helpful now. And the short of it was that the next round but one was going to be in Bahrain. It was when V8s used to go to Bahrain. Yeah. And the main caller for V8s was a guy called Matt White, who was a very important TV presenter. He was a sports presenter, motor racing fan, but not a know-all. But he'd also been given the main presenting job on a program called Today Tonight, which is a bit like our 6 o'clock news. So it was a massive ratings pull for Channel 7. To go to Bahrain is the best part of a week away. And 7 didn't really want to lose him for a week of Today Tonight for really 2 days of supercars, which in ratings terms is a lot smaller. Do you want to go and do it? Said Cochrane. Well, Jesus. Why me? Well, what he was trying to do was get V8s away from this kind of redneck Peter Brock, Dick Johnson, race up and down a mountain kind of attitude, because all international motor racing in Australia had an English voice. You know, they used to take the BBC and then ITV Formula One. So anything that was international had a British sound to it.
Yeah.
So I went off and did this. And that was my sort of first proper throw into live TV. Then I did some of these Motors TV live race days the year after, or 2 years after that. And there was a race meeting the week after Le Mans in whatever year, 2011, I think, or 10, at Jarama. And it was Super League. Do you remember the old football themed single season championship? So I'm driving back from Le Mans with my wife, and the phone rings, and it was Richard Hay, and he said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I said, "I'm going to Castle Combe." "You don't want to go to Castle Combe?" I said, "No, I do. It's good. It's 2 days. It's Castle Combe. It's really good. It's Formula Ford, and it's with the no, Adders, listen. You want to go to Jarama?" I said, "I really don't. For one thing, Howard will have my spleen for a hat if I back out. You know, he doesn't like people. You need to go to Castle Combe." So I rang. I don't know if I rang Howard or if I rang Emma and did the soft approach, like, you know, can I make this your problem, Emma? Anyway, very graciously, Castle Combe let me off, and I went to Jarama and I did this Super League job, which was Super League and the old FIA GT3 European Championship. And a man from SRO came up to me and he said, "Hello, I'm from SRO. We're taking the Super League camera crew to film our races. Would you mind commentating on them?" And I said, "No, absolutely fine," because I probably knew more about that than Super League, perversely. And on the back of it, he asked me to go and do the Spa 24 Hours that year. And on the back, and the Spa 24 Hours of that era, again, putting things in historical context, was when there was the GT1 World Championship. So GT1 World Championship ran as 2 1-hour races. Well, you couldn't have a 24-hour race for a category that had 2 1-hour races. So they ran one on the Friday and one on the Saturday. And the 24 Hours was a non-championship race that year. And it was a real catch-all for GT2, GT3, GT4, anything, really. And it got a good entry. And halfway through the night, Stefan Rattel burst into the press room and said to all of these very sleepy journalists, "This is a beautiful race," and went back to his office. And that was effectively where the Blancpain Endurance Series came from, because Stefan thought, let's take what's worked here. There were only 3, 4, 5 GT2 cars. There were 2 works BMWs. There was the winning Porsche, not many others in GT2, but GT3 was strong and GT4 was reasonably strong. Put the two together, and that's where Blancpain came from. And Mike Scott, the SRO TV guy, said to me, "Well, look, you did effectively the trial run. Do you want to come and do the championship?" So I did 4 of the 5 in the first year, because I did Bathurst, which clashed with the Silverstone finale. And that, I mean, I've done bits and bobs with SRO, obviously with circuit commentary for years and years and years. But that was the foot into the door with the TV side, which has grown and grown and grown. And then touring cars cropped up in the end of 2012, 2013. And as I say, it was never a great ambition to do TV stuff. It's just gravitated that way. And perversely, as I've got busier with it, people have stopped asking me to go to circuits. You know, I've not been to Castle Combe for X years, and it's not been by choice. I mean, genuinely, it's because people have stopped asking me. Either they assume I'm too expensive or I'm too busy or whatever it is. But it's not the case. I mean, I would come to Castle Combe in a heartbeat if somebody asked me and if the dates aligned, because I think it's fantastic and I just love the place and I love the racing. But certainly the television, and you know yourself, it's not just now the box in the corner, it's the live stream, it's whatever. There are so many different ways of watching TV. It gives more opportunities, if you like, for people to do it, but it also means that with more live than highlights, you get more clashes.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, and the live thing's interesting. I remember I was excited when I got booked to do a VLN commentary a couple of years ago now with Radio Le Mans, and I was like, oh wow, I've not been to Nürburgring. I didn't then either. I went to a studio in London,
yes.
you know. And because the point being is you're still going to be tucked in a room anyway, aren't you? And I always find we've got to keep our fan first, haven't we? That's got to come through.
You're right. You are locked in a room, but you miss, and this is what we had with touring cars last year. We were locked in the TV compound. You miss that ability to go and stand trackside and see what the cars are doing, to listen to them, to go and talk to a driver. You know, we had to do some of the SRO stuff for various reasons last year remotely. It's not my cup of tea, but needs must. But if I can be at an event, I would much rather be at the event. Spa was curious because I was the only one of us that was on site. So there was Watty in the UK, Bruce Jones in the UK, and so Watty and I are bouncing off each other with a half a second or second delay, but we're in two different countries.
It's very different discipline, isn't it, as well? I mean, I remember the first time I did it with a stream. Actually, the first time I did it as a stream I was there, and it was actually karting. It was the European karting, which of course is it took me by surprise just how big it was. It's basically mini Formula One paddock, isn't it? When you get there, it's crazy. And I was there, and they say us men can't multitask. We blooming well learn to, don't we? Goodness me, because I had the footage that was going out, a timing screen, a window, so you do get to see the real world and watch it out there as well. Massive paperwork, and I'll come on to that in a minute, the amount of research and everything else that we have to put in. I've got headphones on that's got my co-commentator. I've got an earpiece in here that's the editor or the producer, sorry, the producer of the feed. So you've got two voices plus your own. God knows how many stuff. I mean, how we don't go schizophrenic, I don't know.
Yeah, but do you not find
both of us couldn't work that out?
Well, that's right. But do you not find that dealing with talkback, it's brilliant when you go to the pub, because if you can remember going to a pub, those halcyon days, because you can listen to two conversations at once. Yes. Brilliant. You can be looking somebody in the eye, nodding, and you're listening to him over there. Right, okay, that's all right, okay. Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, touring cars, I think I can have about upwards of 6 people in my ear if I so desire. At any one time, and trying to process all of that and keep talking. You're right, it's not the easiest thing, but you do get used to it. You
can't teach it. I found is the fact that I got there, and I remember the first time I did it, my mind was blown. I'm like, oh my god! And I'll be honest and say, I'm fretting now, thinking I can't do this. And you don't have a choice. You're now live, and you're off. You're running. And then got to the end of it and kind of went, I did.
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
How can?
And it's the best way. Get thrown into it. It's the best way. Isn't it? It's like teaching somebody to swim. Push them into the pool. They'll soon toughen up and flail around and come out the other side.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Incidentally,
a friend of mine, Dave Richardson, who is the guy that does many of the Ferrari challenge round, he tells this lovely story about one of the very first lives he did, and it was for Ferrari challenge with a very formidable Italian lady director. And he said, I'm sitting there, he said, I'm all nervous. He said, I've got my bits of paper, chap, and I'm ready to go. And she starts the count, and I get in my ear, 10, 9, 8, 4, 6. This poor lady had no idea how to count backwards in English. Complete panic. Brilliant.
That's just not what you need, is it? That really
Not
isn't.
at all.
Well, I remember the first time was that I was suddenly had the producer there going, right, clean out in 5. And I'm like, what? Clean out what?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No one had sort of like explained to me that meant that I've got 5 seconds, keep talking, and then you stop so that they're able to do an edit, a cut, and then they're like, right, you're clear to go again. But I had no idea. The next part is once I did understand that, how you and I can talk till the cows come home until someone says, clean out in 10 or clean out in 5, because then it takes some practice to learn how to talk for 5 or 10 seconds. Did you find that in the early days?
Yeah, and to get to make a coherent sentence and finish. Yeah.
That took some practice to work that one out. It was really, really hard. By the way, I meant to say this earlier, just quickly, David, is that we're going to put it up there. Happy birthday to the circuit's managing director, Graham Marshalsea. Apologies, I should have done that at the beginning. I completely forgotten everything else. But happy birthday, Graham.
Happy birthday, Graham.
Hope you've had a wonderful day out with a burrito in the car. I saw it was with your good lady Karen. So happy birthday, Graham. Yes, I touched on it there as well. Is the amount of research? I remember I was at Brands Hatch in fairly early on, probably about maybe 3 years into my commentary career. I only started like 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and my best mate, David, he came with me to Brands Hatch. I think it was like an MG Car Club meet or something like that. And he was stood up with me in the commentary box and he was loving it and thinking it was amazing and what have you. And he turned to me when we had a break. He said, how do you make every driver seem as famous, i.e. you know as much about them as if they were Michael Schumacher or Damon Hill or whatever? And I said, well, they all deserve it. And so you research in the week. People think that we just turn up and talk, or we just have this. I mean, some of you guys have got this amazing recall and memory, and just sort of like devour autosport. And I don't. I just concede I haven't got a good memory. It's terrible. But I research like hell Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, going into a weekend, and that's the least we can do, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the good things about doing TV, if you like, in that I have I don't have to do every category of every event anymore. So, you know, if you take a TOCA meeting, I've got normally touring cars and Porsches. So I know those guys and I know what they're doing. GT racing is a bit harder because there's a lot of them, a lot more cars, and there are 3 drivers per car in the World Challenge endurance races, for example. It always surprises me a bit, though, that drivers don't do more to promote themselves. I mean, when I started, there were still things called commentator information sheets that you would be given to fill in. So when you got your entry form, and there's this very quaint method in those days called the post, and you would get the post with paper that came through your letterbox, and you'd fill in your commentator information sheet and hand it in. And they were fantastic. They were very, very useful. And there was actually a company for a time run by Val and Rob Adaway called Formula Services, and they would handle all drivers' paperwork for them. So they would do the entry forms, process all the paperwork that was needed, and supply the commentator information sheets. It baffles me today that partly they've fizzed out, but that drivers don't make more of an effort to fill them in. I mean, John Hammersley, as an example, John you'll be familiar with from classic sports car club events. John I have known for 100 years, and he's been racing, I think, since something like 75. He's not missed a season. He's raced something somewhere every season, irrespective of medical dramas or whatever it is. And John, without fail, always hands in a commentator information sheet. And it's always typed, and it's in some ways a regurgitation of what you already know, but he does it properly, and he hands it in and provides the information. And I'm surprised that more drivers don't, because with the way certainly that television is going and live streams are going, there are more opportunities to be seen more often by more people. And to me, it's not good enough for a young driver or any driver actually to complain and say, oh, the commentator didn't know this or didn't say that. Well, tell him. We can't be expected to know everything about everybody. You know, we can't. And in the old days, we wouldn't commentate on qualifying. So you did have the morning to go around the paddock and try and do some homework. But now largely at tracks, you're commentating on the qualifying sessions, which I think is very important. I think that's good. I think we should do that. But it deprives you of that ability to go and talk to people. Well, if I go back to the early to mid 90s, many of the key championships like touring cars, like Formula 3, GT, still happens actually for GT now, as you know, but Rover Turbos, MGF Cup, you know, that kind of thing. The likes of Robin Bradford were providing commentator information packs, and the commentator was given this Bible with the results, with driver biogs. Very, very few championships do that. Some of the TOCA championships do. British GT with Tom Hornsby does an excellent job, but it surprises me that more championships don't make the effort and that more drivers don't, because surely you would like to be talked about in positive terms. And if we don't know anything about you, it's blooming hard work to do it.
Well, I've always said is we're simple folk, is that we give us some information and it's stored at the front of our brain at that point, and it falls straight back out into our mouth. You know, if which is why John Hammersley's good to even regurgitate the old stuff, is because we've suddenly gone to other circuits, other championships, other drivers. Plus, we've slept, we've eaten, we've drunk. It's like, right, put it back again because it'll sit at the front and it just falls down and out of our mouth. You know, it's as simple as that. But
it doesn't cost much either to say thank you to the commentator. You know, I can think of drivers that in the course of doing program editorial for, we've done a page on and set up a photo shoot for, never a word of anything, and other drivers that have made the effort to come and say thank you. You know, there are good examples and bad examples of drivers that put things back or just take for granted. But if the commentator does say something nice about you, an email or a text to say, oh, cheers for that, goes a long way, actually, because straight away you've got us on side, because we're all frustrated racing drivers. So to think that you've got a racing driver that's now friendly with you, whoa, that's a big tick, isn't it? So,
and it is still cool, isn't it? We do still enjoy it. I mean, at Castle Combe, we're in a luxury that we don't commentate on the qualifying, so I do get to walk around, which I've absolutely hated this year, that we've not really had that luxury because everybody keeping their distance. And I've been setting up the live stream that we were doing at Combe and all of that, so I've been hands out. But I know that a lot of people have been sort of very complimentary, is that ever since I've started, is that I'm a fan first, and so I'm wandering around the paddock and catching up with everyone, and it's not just info gathering. I'm fanboying to some extent. You know, these are the gladiators that we get to watch out on the circuit doing things we wish we could. And it doesn't matter whether it's club racing, whether it's, you know, international professional racing. They're amazing at what they do, and I love every second of it. And that's why I get excited and I get sort of animated. But we can't always go and find that information out. So feed us the information. And, you know, once you get to know, they sort of drop me lines on messages or whatever else. And we try to make it part of it, because there's times when, dare I say, there isn't as much action to talk about.
Well, no, and exactly.
That's where the info comes out, isn't it?
Yeah. And if you get a red flag, I mean, that's when it's absolutely vital. People are very keen to say to me, well, you know, I'd like to be a commentator. Can I send you a link to my YouTube, whatever, and you can hear me? Well, yeah, fine. If you want. But also, can you do a 10-minute to black? Well, what do you want me to say? Well, that's the point, because that's your red flag, isn't it? That's your delay while the barrier is being repaired or whatever. That's the bit that you earn your money. The lights out to the flag, that's the easy bit.
Yeah, I still remember a day at Combe where we had something like 3 or 4 long red flags, like at least half hour each. And it's still probably one of the proudest days that I was getting comments at the end of the day where people saying, wow, you just kept us not necessarily informed, because quite often there isn't anything to say. It's all happening, but having a giggle, interacting with the fans, letting them know things about what has been, what is going to be, and information about the drivers that are coming. You know, it's really, really nice. I love this. Matt Parr, one of our saloon car drivers, enjoy a Dawes chat and laugh before the afternoon. Also see you wandering around talking to drivers and teams, or doing a stream on Facebook, etc. And you know, that's what we like to do. But if we can't be there, then feed us that information. We still need it. Just because we're not there, we still want it.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And especially when new drivers appear in a championship, you know, whether it's Castle Combe series or visiting championships, you know, you'll get to know the regulars, but somebody arrives new, first year of racing. Great. You know, tell us about yourself. We want to know.
It is. We do. We love it. That's why I always say to racing drivers when I've worked with some of them on some sort of media training, is that it ain't rocket science. Go and speak to the commentators, you know, because again, I said we're simple folk. Tell us something, it's there, and guess what? It just suddenly falls out, and we regurgitate stuff that we've just heard a little while ago, and so it's really, really handy to be able to do. For people that you mentioned about that people contact you saying, you know, I'd like to get into commentary, it still amazes me. I know why you would, but I get contacted as well for that, which I take as a massive compliment in reality. And I'm always asked about, you know, advice. And point one, I always say, I've got to be honest to say, there's a huge amount of luck involved in all of it. It really is, massively so. In starting, let alone being able to do certain things. But I'm going to ask you for your advice. So have a think for a second. But I know, for example, if I ever advise people, there is two distinct things that I try to say. And that is, one, be reliable. I mean, you're clearly the same as me, and or should I say, I'm the same as you. Sorry, I'll make sure I get it the right way around. In that you know, you were being asked to go there, and it's like, well, I'm already booked to go here, and it's like not just suddenly drop. I'm off to something else, which a surprising number still do.
Yeah,
is number one for me. I think that stood me in the best stead. Secondly, is don't try to. And I hope this makes sense. Don't try to be a commentator. There is no being a commentator. Is be a fan talking about what you are watching and get excited and sort of like draw pictures. Imagine that no one is there and you're trying to draw that picture, and don't try to be a commentator, be a fan first. That's the two things I say. What are your pieces of advice that you give to anybody?
I'd go along with the don't try and be a commentator bit, but I would also not necessarily say be a fan. I would say know your audience, because there are going to be events where you're talking to people that actually know more about it than you do. You know, if I go and do a historic race meeting, if I go and do Goodwood, for example, I've been lucky enough to do the TV for the revival, and I did all of the Speed Week stuff last year. There are certain categories, certain eras I can hold my own on, but I don't claim to know everything about 1960s Grand Prix cars because I wasn't there. 70s, 78 was the first British Grand Prix I went to. So from the late 70s onwards, certainly through that Cosworth DFV era, which I think was fantastic, I've got no qualms about that. But don't try and, first of all, sound like you know everything when you don't, because people will rumble you. Don't admit you don't know. Just don't get yourself in a sentence that you can't get out of, for example. Don't say, you hear lots of people, and I know I do it myself on occasions, and I shouldn't, but you sort of pose a question and then say, I don't know. As in, you know, has he got a mechanical problem, or is it a slow puncture? I don't know. Well, if you don't know, don't say it, or at least don't put that bit in. But that's going off at a slightly different point. Know your audience. So if it's a Castle Combe crowd, there are some people there that know all of those drivers in the local championships very well because they go every week, and there are people that are at Castle Combe for the first time because they've heard it's really good. If you go to a touring car meeting, you've got touring car fans, and again, you've got people that come out and watch it because they've seen it on TV. They don't give a rat's really about the support drivers. They've come to watch the touring cars because they've seen them on telly and they've come to see a few crashes. Know your audience. Go back a bit further. Advice for commentators. Why do you want to be a commentator? Because a lot of people say, I want to be a commentator. I watch all the Formula One Grand Prix. Great. Very pleased for you. You may have noticed that's well catered for. Or I want to be a commentator. This is one that gets me. I watch all the TOCA meetings. It's not TOCA, it's TOCA. And I'm not a turkey voting for Christmas. I'm a bit happy doing those at the moment. So, serious point. Why do you want to be a commentator? Is it because you think it's going to make you a TV star? Or is it because you are a motor racing fan and you think that you can make a positive contribution? If you think you can make a positive contribution, by all means, do a YouTube race commentary and put it up, and then go back to it in 2 or 3 days and have a listen. And just think, could I sit and listen to that realistically? Because the danger is you show it to a family member and you say, what do you think? They say, well, that's good, that. Right, it's good. What they mean is, that's good considering you've never done it before. And it's a bit like when my 8-year-old brings me a picture of a cow and I say, that's a fantastic block of flats. Daddy, it's a cow. Oh, yeah, it's a lovely. Champion. Great, excellent.
Yeah.
Right? So just be realistic and think, could I listen to that? Is that of a standard that I would be comfortable listening to, whether it's trackside or on television? And be realistic with yourself about your knowledge, because it's not just about, as we've discussed, the shouty bit from lights going out to the checkered flag waving. I mean, the best grounding, actually, I'm talking about YouTube links, but the best grounding is track. If you look at people that have come from doing circuits to doing TV, nor me for a minute, but Ben Edwards is an example of somebody that came out of doing circuits before he did Eurosport and onwards. The beauty of doing track commentary, as you know, Chris, is you have got to be the commentator and the producer and the director, in a sense, because you don't have anybody in your ears. You turn on your microphone at 2 o'clock or 12 o'clock, whatever time you want. And you keep going until the curfew, pretty much. And you are responsible for the exciting bits, for the not so exciting bits, for promoting the burger van, for promoting programs, for the next events, for handing over to your co-commentator and or the guy to do the podium. And you've got to juggle all of that. There's nobody saying, okay, in your ear, throw to so-and-so in 5, 4, 3, 2. You've got to do that. You've got to decide. You've got to be aware that a microphone is open. It's another noise. That means he's ready. It's a brilliant training ground for then going on and doing television stuff. So if you want to be a TV commentator, then get realistic first and think about doing circuits. But to do circuits, be prepared that it's not going to pay you very much. So you are a fan with a microphone, but there are fringe benefits, like you get in for nothing, and you might be dry and you might be warm, and you get a free program and you get one of the best seats in the house, depending on the circuit. There are some fairly lamentable boxes, but if you can do a good job of that, then it makes that transition, I think, to television commentary a lot easier.
Agreed. I mean, I remember when I mentioned earlier, I did the VLN for Radio Le Mans, and I was really nervous about that because I think you probably know that their fan base is very knowledgeable, very tight together. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I got to be careful here. And I'd never watched VLN before. I kind of knew what it was, but I never watched it. And it's like stupid number. Of course, 160 cars or something crazy.
Bonkers, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. It's just, and with the best prep in the world, because I started prepping and went, I can't do my usual type of prep with that many cars, then multiple drivers per car. You just can't know enough about all of them and what have you. And I went into this and I was with Johnny Palmer, which was probably a good thing because he's a lovely guy and was a great guy to work with. And I knew him anyway. And we're sat there and I decided, do you know what? Picking up on your comment is that I cannot blag my way through this one. And so I therefore actually went, Johnny, so we're doing the commentary and I'm like on air, Johnny, so I was seeing that this happens. Why does that happen? What's that for? What does that mean? And I was getting comments from the faithful kind of going, do you know what? That's really good that you asked that, because I'd forgotten that was the situation because we've watched so much of it that I've forgotten some of those things. And they actually found it endearing that I wasn't trying to blag it.
Yeah, no, and there are occasions where you'll hear me in touring car terms ask Tim Harvey a question, and in the early days I'd do this and Tim would look at me like, what the hell are you asking me that for? Surely you know that. And I said to him afterwards, you don't have to look at me like that. I'm asking it because there will be people that don't. So I'm kind of sacrificing myself here for the benefit of the viewer. And the best example of all of that is a guy called Mike Raymond, the late Mike Raymond, who was the round man of sound, brilliant Australian commentator, Mike Raymond. If you go and look on YouTube for 80s, 90s Bathursts and Australian touring car racing, Mike Raymond you will hear. And Mike was just outstanding. And he was not only the lead commentator, but also the executive producer. And so Mike looked at this from the perspective of, I want a good broadcast. It's not about me telling you how much I know and showing off. It's about you, the viewer, enjoying this 6-7 hour ride that we're about to go on. And he therefore would sacrifice himself. And it didn't matter to him whether he told you that the gap was down to a tenth of a second or one of the others did, as long as you got the information. And Mike would do the starts, the finishes, the shouty, screamy bits. He'd do the nicknames. He'd do the car going into the barrier, crunch, and all of that. And that was his character. But he was absolutely on top of everything, but didn't mind, if you like, sacrificing himself for the good of the broadcast. He was quite happy to ask silly questions because he knew the answer. So he could get, he knew what silly questions to ask, if you like. And it wasn't an obvious silly question because he knew exactly what the answer was, so he knew how to phrase it. So the viewer got the information.
Well, that was what I learned. I remember I was covering historic meet, and I had to. They were going to do a display, and I would suddenly went and speaking to the person that was setting up this amazing historic display of vehicles, and I'm asking all this information, trying to get all these load of notes because I've got to then be on the mic and talking it and then grabbing interviews with them. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know all of this stuff. I'm not a mechanic. I'm not an ex-racer. I'm a fan that has gone to university and got drunk and whatever else, so therefore missed great big bits of life and yada, yada, yada. And then that was a defining moment for me as I went, hang on, it's not about me knowing it. It's about me knowing there's something to ask to get them, the experts, to start speaking. And that was a defining moment for me. Equally with the commentating was that for me, it's about remembering it's entertainment first and foremost. The late, sadly lost this year, Brian Jones, probably the first one to really pioneer that style, I think. In reality of going, it wasn't just, it's not a horse race, and it's not all got to be experts, and it's the best setup is an expert and a fan and an excited entertainer and what have you. And you know, I try to make sure that it's entertaining, but and it is, and you mentioned about knowing your audience. It's also about knowing that audience is varied. Do you find that as well, where you've kind of got to go, you've got the ones that know everything and you've got to still talk to them, but you've got the kids that are there for the first time and they know it's red with a yellow stripe or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, one of the toughest, I mean, that's over-egging it a bit, but the hardest to judge was when I used to do the World Series by Renault events. We had Donington for a couple of years and then it moved to Silverstone. And that was something like 100,000 free tickets. So they out of that, whatever crowd there was, there might be 5,000 people that were regular motor racing fans who'd come to watch racing, but most were there because they got a free ticket and they didn't know anything at all. So, you know, you go through the grid for Formula Renault 3.5 and you're banging on about this driver having won in Formula Renault Euro Cup and that person's finished fourth in the German Formula 4 Championship. You might as well have been speaking Latin because they just don't know it. And you know, the professional is the wrong word, but the whatever it is in me wants to make sure that I'm delivering information. But then you think to yourself, most of this is wasted. And Goodwood, actually, I learned when I did the festival for the first time. I went with my, if you like, travelling library, and quickly worked out that it's pointless. This, you only need a little soundbite about each car because A, it's for television, so you're bouncing from car to car to car anyway as they're going up the hill. But you've not got a motor racing audience. You've got a few motor racing fans, but you've got people that like Formula One and they like supercars, and there are people that are there for a weekend out. And so it's not a motor racing history lesson.
No, exactly.
You need to know something, but
yeah,
it's not. Neville Hay said to me when I started doing things for him all those years ago, you're not here to show people how much you know. You're here to stop them changing channel. And he's right. Yeah.
Well, I've always said that Marcus Pye was, an absolute hero to me. The very first person when I got taken on as a trainee at Castle Combe, and I got to shadow the commentators to start with. He was the first person I shadowed, and I was ready to go, forget it, can't do this, because Marcus is a walking encyclopedia. You know, the amount he knows is amazing. He just staggers me how much he knows. And I know there's a lot of you that know incredible amounts, but he just seems to be phenomenal. And he turned to me at the end and he said, how did you find that? What did you think? I said, I don't think I can do this. He says, why not? I said, I just don't. I thought that I knew stuff, but I know nothing. Listening to how much you know. And he said, no, let me stop you there. Now, he could have taken me out of the game right there and then. He said, let me stop you there. He says, that's my style. I love all of the detail and everything. He said, but there are people that won't like my style as much as there are people that like my style. You have got to find your way, your style. And if you're just because yours isn't knowing that amount, that doesn't make you wrong or bad. It just makes you different. And that was like one of those defining things for me, is that I went, right, I'm going to be Chris Dawes. If it doesn't work, it never was meant to.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there are plenty of people that don't like the way I do it. There are a few that do, but you're not going to please everybody. Right. So, well, it helps having a surname starting with A and being cheap. You see, people don't go far down the list. That's
oh, I've heard about you, mate.
If I was called Zachariah, I'd have been that. Yeah, you're not going to please everybody. So, I'd like to think that I can get a race read up and people can get excited about it. The start of the Grand Prix is always a highlight. Try and build that up. You're right. You find your own style, and people will like bits and not like bits. Absolutely right.
And you've got to learn to live with that as well, haven't you? But the other one as well, and I wonder whether you've now got yourself into the stage with the British touring cars. By the way, we will be wrapping this up very shortly, everybody. But just to say is that I remember, Tony and Jill from Castle Combe, of course, up in the commentary box and do a lot of lap charting and very, very helpful. They're part of the furniture. They're a lovely couple. And I remember Jill's big advice to me as well was don't get... Now, she used the phrase, and I remember being surprised she knew the phrase, cliquey, in the fact that it can be very easy to suddenly go, if we take ours, there goes Parr, there goes Preble, there goes, Mills, there goes whatever. Because we know the names, you're suddenly alienated a massive chunk. There will be a chunk that are following it, but there's a massive chunk that are. You still have to add a little bit more to it rather than my mate, whatever type of feel. And I'd imagine because of the amount of touring cars you've done, you still have to keep yourself in that disciplined mindset.
I do, but I mean, it's a bit different for touring cars, if only because it's on TV. So people can see who you are talking about. If you're talking about people at camp and they're sat over at Quarry, it's a bit different. So, I mean, going back to circuit commentary days, there would be laps where I would do Preble from Mills, from whoever, and there'd be laps where I do it's 91 Preble in the lead, second is 72. So people have got that that connection with a number as well as a name, and try and do it each way. I mean, I suppose when I started, I used to think it was almost a sign of weakness to have to keep giving out the number, because you should know who it is. You should know as a commentator that number 91 is Gary Preble or whatever it is. But you're right, you learn that actually know your audience. For TV, it's a bit different. The numbers are, as you know, on touring cars and most racing cars these days, pretty small. And certainly in touring cars over the last few years, they've gone the same way as supercars in Australia. So that the car is completely now the livery, and the number is in the window, and lots of other championships have followed suit. So instead of perhaps talking about the numbers, I might talk about the blue and white Infiniti, or the black and white Honda, or the grey Honda, or the whatever it is, to give the colours to go with the car. So, that's the way of recognising it rather than a number. Because again, there will be people that know absolutely which colour of wing mirror you need to differentiate the Dan Camish Honda from the Matt Neal Honda. And there'll be a lot of people that don't know that it's a Honda. You've got to try and appease both sides, haven't you?
You do. It is tricky. It is definitely very tricky. But I think you'll be one of the first to say this, despite how much you do. It's still such a privilege, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if I'd have known all those years ago that I would have gone to the places that I've gone to and done what I've done as a fanboy, as you make the point, I wouldn't have believed it, and like I said earlier, there was never any real ambition in this other than to get into Walton Park for free and go and sit in the warmth at Knickerbrook, where I have spent less time than I could ever have imagined in the last 20 years by going off, and I've been very fortunate to go off and do other things at other places. People say, what's the best race you've ever seen? The next one, because there's always that excitement of the next event, and you don't know what's going to happen or who you're going to bump into or what might come of it. Can't wait to get back out and get going.
Oh, no, it is. I agree. 100% special. It really is. I could carry on talking to you forever, David, but we better not for everybody else's sanity.
Well, you've got till the 8th of March, apparently. That's when we've got to go back. We can keep talking. Yeah.
Tim Perry, I've never had a bad experience from what a commentator says. I don't expect the same thing from every commentator. I've enjoyed what I hear at Combe and also what you say on BTCC, David. Legend of the circuit, David Vass says, Chris and David, what an interesting evening you've put on for us. Thank you very much. Chris Mason, our paramedic now, as well as everything else he does at the circuit on the medical side. Fantastic evening. Thank you, David and Dawes, for a great night. Mike Cotton, one of our hardcore fans, thanks for a fascinating program, and I hope it was, guys, for you. It's been a great deal of fun, and as I say, David, honestly, I could keep talking to you, and we might try and grab you back on again at some point.
Absolutely. No, pleasure. Yeah,
it's one of those things. I know that you've probably been incredibly busy, but we Tom Davis and I put this on to sort of give an escape for everybody in this terrible, terrible year that we've all had. And thank you to everybody that keeps supporting us. As you'll see, David, this is now episode 41.
Well, I have watched a few of them, and I have to say, and I'm not just saying this because you've been kind enough to give me something to do for an evening, but it's been very impressive. And yesterday I did a similar thing for Speedworth TV, which is a channel for Speedworth stock car circuits in the South and East Anglia. And they've done a similar thing. They've started live streaming meetings, and they've done what they call back on track, and do things like this, interview drivers and no marks like me. And they've had a sort of classic races series and look back. And it's amazing, is it not, the positives that you can drag out of what we've been through, because suddenly, it is tempting to suggest that Castle Combe TV in this iteration, Chris, wouldn't have happened if it had been a normal season last year, a normal season this year. But here's a positive out of all of this, that you've got a TV channel, that you've got people coming on and being interviewed and reminiscing, and you've got clearly a good, enthusiastic, interactive audience, and that speaks volumes, I think.
Absolutely, and hence Chris Mason says, please come back soon. So
I would. I'll ask somebody to invite me, and I'll be back.
You will. You'll be back. You'll be back. It's been an absolute pleasure, my friend, and I know you and I will be catching up at the circuits for things like British GT and GT Wiltshire. Look forward to that as well, and hopefully, we'll get you back at the circuit at some point as well, which would be great.
I'll be delighted. It's been too long. So yes, as long as we can get some calendars that A, align, and B, actually, stay rather than juggling. Like I fear we're going to have more shuffling for this year, aren't we? But we'll see. But yes,
we had it on the British GT, haven't we? You and I all both suffered from that one. So
yeah, a little bit already, and yeah, who knows? I mean, the international calendar is perhaps looking a bit odd now, because if you can't go in and out the country through the latest element of bungling Boris and his bumper book of COVID contradictions, who knows where we're up to next? So, yeah,
stop it.
Who knows?
don't go getting political, David. We don't do that. We might compare Jim, but we don't compare politics. But
do we not? He's a politician, is he? Right? Okay.
Yeah. Apparently so. Apparently. Stop it. Right. I'm going to put you back into the green room, and I'll chat to you after we go off air. But everybody's been delighted to catch up with you. Thank you so much for your time, David.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for getting me to reminisce. It has brought back lots of good memories, certainly of those F3 GT days. And who knows, I'll look forward to being back at Combe one day, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I'm going to put David back into the green room, and I'll be with you in a second, David. Everybody else, thank you so much for your attention. I apologise that I'll make an apology that it probably went on longer than some of you may have liked, but by the sounds of it, actually not. I could have carried on talking for a lot longer with David, I can assure you, and I think we're going to have to get him back on again. It's such a pleasure. We are back next Thursday. That is going to be the Hintzer thing, which is going to be talking about fitness, diet, psychology, all those kind of things. Really interesting. These people work with Formula One drivers, and Russell Pointer-Brown works with them, and he's going to be on and bringing a very special guest with him. And it's something that's actually trying to give you something for free, because there's going to be some useful information in that, as well as some very interesting information. And I don't just mean for the drivers. Obviously, there's the biggest impact is for the drivers. If you improve every aspect by 1%, you'll be amazed at how much it'll improve. But I think the reality is for all of us, especially at times where we're a bit more confined than we'd like to. I know that I'm hoping that this is all good escape for you, but we're all going to be able to help to improve our mental health, our physical health, everything. So tune in next Thursday, 7:00 as normal. The information will start going out tomorrow, I think, from that. I then do allow myself a week off the week after, but we're back after that, I think, with Reese Motorsport Insurance have signed up for another year. So welcome on board, guys. And they're going to bring with them a couple of very special guests, young drivers, a male and a female, very talented drivers, have already achieved plenty and have got a big future ahead of them. And we're going to be able to catch up with them, I believe. I'll finalise that, or let you all know once it's all finalised. But for now, from Combe TV, it's been an absolute pleasure to have your company again tonight. Thank you so much. Stay safe. Stay testing that gin. We'll see you back again very, very soon. I'm going to play you out with the ARDS test again. Good night.
Becoming a racing driver has never been easier with Castle Combe Circuit. Book your ARDS novice drivers training course at the Wiltshire venue today. The easiest and quickest way into competitive on-track action.
Welcome to Castle Combe. My name's Alan Cooper. I'm the Chief Driving Racing Instructor here at this circuit. We're here today to do the novice driver training course, often known as the ARDS course, which is the first grade to start off and get your racing driving licence. So, no further ado, let's get on and show you what's involved.
So you've seen the format. Everyone here today passed their tests and now have their racing licence. Who knows? The next time I see them could be as I commentate on them in front of the usual packed house of racing fans here at Castle Combe Circuit. All you need to do to be next is to visit castlecombecircuit.co.uk and select Become a Racing Driver under the Racing tab. Becoming a racing driver is easier than you think with Castle Combe Circuit and Motorsport UK.